face behind the channel. I am not a content creator, as you will probably notice by the end of the video. This is just a one-off. The only reason why I think this is necessary is because I have gained a lot of criticism and a lot of disbelief from people whenever I try to tell my experiences of the Ukraine war, and whenever I try to tell some uncomfortable truth about both sides of the war. So, a little bit about my person. I was a soldier of the German army for 5 years. I was in Afghanistan and I joined the war in Ukraine in March. I joined up with the International Legion. I was inducted into the Alphas, the Alpha unit, which is a so-called Special Forces group under the Defensive Intelligence Ministry of Ukraine, or GUR as they're called here. I think DIU is the American abbreviation. I was on combat deployments in Irpin and Bucha, and later on in the Kherson region. After that, I joined a special forces unit in the ZSU, the Armed Forces of Ukraine, and have been operating in the Kherson region ever since. Now, why am I saying this? Why am I telling all this? I have no agenda, although I deeply support Ukraine, as you might be able to tell by now. When I speak of the Ukrainian army, I have no personal agenda. I simply want to tell my side of the story, tell the truth that I have witnessed myself. Now, I simply want to dispel some of the common myths that I see in this conflict. First and foremost, the absolute ridiculous notion of Russian air power, which has been just the biggest meme in the entire war. So, as anyone with access to Western media should know by now, Russia has barely any power in the air. Russia has not had air dominance at any point during the war. I've seen what air power looks like in Afghanistan and what air dominance looks like in Afghanistan. This ain't it. So the Russian capabilities to conduct air raids, close air support and battlefield support have been incredibly limited and have just been decreasing, and the skies have been consistently taken over by the Ukrainians in the past couple of weeks. If that'll hold, I have no idea. The second myth, in quotation marks, is the performance of the Russian army. Now, there's a lot of media in the West telling you that the performance of the Russian army is trash. They're not wrong, but I have nowhere found an article that really captures just how unbelievably bad the performance of the Russian army is. It is absolutely staggering. They seem to struggle with the most basic tasks of maintaining combat effectiveness. So I think the best example is the Russians actually have a habit of not posting OPs and leaving their front line unguarded. So it has been, on multiple occasions, we have been able to completely take them off guard by simply walking into their occupied territories, by simply walking into a village and opening fire on them. My good friend Yuri from the Nakin Fots channel actually has a video of himself driving a Humvee into Russian lines on his channel, and they took them completely off guard with absolutely no recourse, no warning, even though they never bothered to even dismount from the Humvees until the fight started. So I think that speaks volume to just how bad the Russian army actually is performing in light of all the other information on logistics and morale. What gets me far, far, far more criticism, however, is when I talk about the performance of the Ukrainian army. I've witnessed that firsthand, and me and everyone I serve with here will say the exact same thing. The Ukrainian army is not comparable to a NATO army like France, Britain, Germany. Not even Germany, no, trust me. There are so many systemic issues on every level of command, starting with, of course, corruption. Ukraine is the second most corrupt country in Europe. It should not be a surprise to anyone that this corruption is present in the military as well, especially during times of war. Commanders selling weapons, shady dealings, people being stiffed out of their pay. It's very common. There's a beautiful article of the Kyiv Independence, of a pro-Ukrainian newspaper, by two great investigative journalists that interviewed myself, along with many other former legionaries, on just how deep the corruption runs. I will link it down below. You should absolutely give it a read if you're interested in the actual state of the Ukrainian military. Now, I left the Legion thinking that the problems were endemic to the Legion, and I was sorely mistaken when I joined up with the ZSU. The problems persisted on every level. I think most notably what needs to be talked about the most is a lack of dedicated leadership, a lack of experienced, well-trained officers. I've seen junior officers being pushed out after just 2 or 3 weeks of training back in the summer. There is a general lack of leadership on almost every level of command, even in the basic units. Oftentimes in the field it is quite a mess of just 2 or 3 guys who generally have an idea of what's going on, who just make up what needs to be done on the spot. The level of training, to call it varied, is very generous. Most of the units I've been with have received little to no training. Oftentimes they're not even within the ZSU, they're not even aware of basic battlefield doctrine. Fire and movement, coordination between fire and movement barely exists in this country. It's a surprise to them when you tell them that you cannot fight on a slope facing the enemy. It's things that just should be obvious to anyone who's had a basic training in, well, pick any Western country. Supplies have been bad, logistics have been pretty bad, even though they're fighting in their own country. We've been without food for days sometimes. We'd have to scavenge and ask the civilian populations for food on several occasions in several different theaters. And a lot of these issues really shouldn't be a surprise. If you know about Ukraine, if you know about the state of post-Soviet Ukraine, these endemics shouldn't be an issue. It shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, certainly. And for all the criticisms I like to level against the Ukrainian army, they're doing as well as you would expect an army to do that has their historic baggage. Ukraine barely had an army in 2014, and certainly not an army that was ready to take on such a Herculean task. The fact that they managed is quite extraordinary. But we absolutely cannot let that blind us to the fact that Ukrainian military is very, very poor and only shines because they are competing against the Russian army, whose performance is beyond pathetic. Now, another topic that is very, very, very touchy that I would still like to talk about is the idea that the Ukrainians can't do anything wrong. The Ukrainians would never do anything wrong, to the point where I've seen people criticize Amnesty International for pointing out the fact that Ukraine is not sticking to the Geneva Convention, even accusing them of lying, even accusing them of being pro-Russian, despite their massive condemnation of Russian, well, to me, borders on genocide, especially in Bucha. Let me get this clear. Ukraine is locked in a struggle for survival against an enemy that does not care about the most basic human rights of the Ukrainians. Not about the civilians, not about soldiers. And when you're locked in such a struggle for survival, do you think it is surprising? Should it be surprising when Ukraine does not play by the rules all the time? I have picture evidence later in the video. Ukraine regularly uses ambulances and vehicles marked with the Red Cross as troop transports. In the Legion, we would call that the war crime mobile. And the Ukrainian army definitely uses civilian structures and civilian buildings in civilian areas as their bases. Not as temporary shelters, not as temporary storages, no, as permanent bases. I think this is also detailed in the Kyiv Independent article. I'll also show you pictures down the line of Ukrainian units using what is essentially a girls' dormitory as a base, as an operating base in the center of Kyiv. Now, does that excuse Russian airstrikes on civilian populations? No. Do I want to downplay the Russian crimes? No. But I think it's important that we talk about these things. It's important that these things are recognized as true. This is all I want to clarify here. I just want to speak the truth. All of this that I speak about, the things that I comment about, are my personal experience. They're not informed by Russia Today or Tucker Carlson or whatever other lies you might think about. This is the truth. As I have lived it, as my comrades have lived it. If you want to know more, maybe I'll do another video, but if you're interested in juicy footage, absolutely check out my friend Yuri from the Nacken Thoughts channel. I'll link his footage down below where he shows some of the fighting our team has done and talks about some of the missions we've been on. With that, I leave you to a little sloppy deer show. Like I said, I'm not a content creator, so just enjoy my video evidence. Thank you very much. Slava Ukraini. So here I just want to point out what you're seeing. Again, this is a girls' dormitory. Here are pictures of us inside of the war crime mobile in civilian areas. These are the only instances where I have photo evidence of Ukrainians using these war crime mobiles and of us getting fed by civilians living in civilian population centers, but this has occurred multiple times in multiple occasions in multiple units.